Each week on Culinary Confidential, Christina Cates, a seasoned foodie who has worked at some of New York City's top restaurants, will share her passion for the culinary world. Whether you're a professional chef, a restaurant enthusiast, or a lover of good food, Christina dives into the heart of hospitality, exploring the trends, triumphs, and challenges facing the food service profession. And you won't want to miss her chats with some of the most interesting and influential industry voices. And now, please take your seat at the table as Culinary Confidential with Christina Cates starts now, exclusively on AM 970, The Answer.
Welcome to Culinary Confidential with Christina Cates. This show is produced in association with Lucas A. Ferrara and Shake It Off Live. There's a sound that means summer has arrived. It's not the ice cream truck. It's not the pop of a beach umbrella. It's the scrape of a knife against the shell, the twist of a wrist, and that soft, briny pop, the sound of an oyster being shucked to order. Tonight, we're prying open one of the most fascinating, most misunderstood, and right now, most popular foods on the planet. We're talking oysters. Love them or leave them, they're all the rage. Let's start with a number that should stop you in your tracks. A single adult oyster can filter up to 50 gallons of water a day. 50 gallons, one oyster. Multiply that by billions of oysters living in a healthy reef system, and you start to understand why marine biologists call them ecosystem engineers. They don't just taste like the ocean, they clean it. Every bay with a thriving oyster population is a bay that's breathing easier. And here's another fact that tends to blow people's minds, mine included. Oysters change gender during their lifetime. Most start out male and switch to female as they mature, sometimes flipping back and forth more than once depending on water temperature and energy reserves. Nature, it turns out, has a much looser relationship with gender than we do. Now, for generations, there was a rule about eating oysters. You've probably heard it. Only eat oysters in months with an R in them. September through April, yes. May through August, absolutely not. That superstition is centuries old, and it actually made sense before refrigeration. Summer oysters were more likely to spoil in transit, and they're also spawning in warmer months, which makes them softer and milkier, not spoiled, just different. But here's a twist for tonight's episode. That rule is basically extinct. Modern cold chain logistics mean an oyster can go from the water to your plate on ice within hours. And many farms now grow what's called a triploid oyster, bred with an extra set of chromosomes so it never spawns at all, staying plump and mild all summer long. That's a huge part of why oyster happy hour in July is now just as normal as it is in December, which brings us to why oysters are having such a massive cultural moment right now. Raw bars have become the new cocktail bar, and nobody loves a raw bar or seafood tower quite like me. Restaurants are building entire identities around a rotating oyster list, chalked up on a board like a wine menu. Social media loves them. That glistening, jewel-toned half shell is basically built for a photo. And there's a wellness angle, too. Oysters are famously dense in zinc, B12, and protein for very few calories. So they've become the indulgence that people can still feel good about ordering by the dozen, if not more. But the real reason oyster culture has exploded is the same reason wine culture exploded decades ago: terroir. Except with oysters, we call it merroir, the taste of the specific water they grew in. The same species of oyster grown in Maine versus Louisiana versus British Columbia will taste completely different because it's absorbing the minerality, salinity, and algae of that exact spot on the map. So let's talk varietals, because this is where it gets fun. On the East Coast, you've got the Wellfleet from Cape Cod, prized for a clean, briny snap. The Blue Point from Long Island, the Long Island Sound, I believe. The classic training wheels oyster, if you will. Approachable, mildly sweet. And then head up to New Brunswick and you'll find the Beausoleil, small, almost fruity, with a delicate, crisp finish. Prince Edward Island gives us the Malpac, one of the most award-winning oysters in the world, and they're grassy and clean. Across the country to the Pacific, and the flavor profile shifts entirely. The Kumamoto, my absolute favorite, is small, deep-cupped, and famously sweet with an almost melon-like finish. The Shijoku is a Kumamoto's punchier cousin, crisp, almost cucumber-like, and Fanny Bay from British Columbia splits the difference. Briny up front, sweet on the back end. That range from delicate and sweet to bracing and mineral is exactly why my guest tonight has spent over a decade chasing oysters across the entire American coastline. Her name is Virginia Shaffer, though a lot of people know her simply as Lady Oyster. She's a food writer and certified Oyster Sommelier, and she's the founder of Lady Oyster Tours and Tastings, Maine's very first Oyster Culinary Tour Company, which was just named the winner of Best Rural Culinary Heritage Experience globally by the World Food Travel Association in 2025. I mean, that's super cool. Virginia has spent more than 10 years writing about shellfish, with bylines and features in NPR, Boston Chronicle, Edible, Good Grit, My Maine, and Post and Courier. But her deepest work is bottled up in her new book, a project that took her from the icy winter oyster beds of New England, down the eastern seaboard, into Florida, and all the way up the West Coast, chasing the story of the oyster industry from the water up. The book is called Oyster Society, Adventures with the Shellfishly Motivated, published by Islandport Press. It's not a cookbook, though she does sneak a few recipes in. It's a deep dive into the history of the oyster, the difference between farmed and wild, the surprisingly wild story of how an oyster begins life as spat, and the colorful, hardworking people who've built their entire lives around this one small, briny, world-changing creature. Virginia Shaffer, Lady Oyster herself, is here. Virginia, welcome to Culinary Confidential. I have to tell you, I've interviewed chefs, restaurateurs, distillers, even culinary historians, but I don't think I've ever had someone who's built an entire world around one humble shell. You transformed a love of oysters into a globally recognized culinary tourism company, and in the process, you've helped people see that an oyster isn't just something you eat. It's a story, an ecosystem, and a sense of place. So let's start there. When did that first oyster stop being lunch and become your life's calling? Was there one specific oyster, one moment that turned you from someone who enjoyed oysters into someone who obsessed over them?
Oh, Christina, well, this is one of my favorite questions, and I'm so glad to be with you. Oysters, for me, have kind of always what I call been a background prop in my story. My childhood was filled with coastal adventures, and I had grandparents who sincerely loved teaching us about seafood. But, as one does, you go through school, get into corporate. You love going to raw bars because it's just fun to eat oysters, and I absolutely love them. But I just realized that I needed a bigger hobby in my life, and oysters just kept intriguing me. There was something about them where I got to learn the name of oyster farmers even on menus. And I was like, what is going on with oysters? Why are there names on menus here? I don't get to know who caught my trout. Right. So that kind of sparked the interest. But then when I really visited my first oyster farm, that's when the obsession, I think, really sat in.
So where did you grow up?
I was born on the Eastern Shore in Maryland, and just across from the Chesapeake Bay Bridge. And then kind of moved around the Maryland area, around D.C. for most of my childhood. Yeah, so always kind of close to the city, but could escape to the coast to see family.
And so then you grew up eating oysters down in Maryland?
I did. Chesapeake oysters, absolutely. And there's still such a wonderful culture around oysters there, and even growing.
I love it. Okay, so let's start with Lady Oyster Tours, right? You have this remarkable tourism company up in Maine, which has been globally recognized. Tell me about how you came to start this oyster tours and tasting.
Well, it's kind of a funny story. I had done 10 years of writing about oysters, and I had been working on a book, and even left a career behind to do those projects. When I kind of decided, what am I going to do with all of this oyster knowledge? I thought to myself, I was once a curious consumer who really wanted to learn more. And it's really hard to find that at raw bars in a higher paced environment at a restaurant. So how can we slow down and teach people some stories and let them ask questions about a really niche food? And that's how it started. We launched a retreat where we invited people to Maine to experience oysters to the fullest. And then I realized, what if I could parse out that retreat and all the little events we did into bite-sized formats where more people could come to Maine and enjoy those different experiences. So that's kind of how it started.
I need to know what you did before you got into the oyster business. Like, what was that corporate job that you left?
Yeah, I was in it for 10 years. I was in global sales for a corporate travel management company.
Well, that sounds cool, actually.
It was really cool. And the company I worked for was honestly wonderful. They were Australian, an incredible, fun culture of, high incentives and rewards. But I was on a plane every single week. pitching to large markets, so some of your Fortune 500 companies, and earning those contracts to book and manage their travel. So that's what it was.
All right. So you left the glamorous world of corporate America to do your own thing. And I think that's really cool and inspiring. Just walk me through like a day at Lady Oyster Tours and Tourism. Like what can people expect like from start to finish?
So what we do is we divide our experiences into two verticals. We have your sensory dining experience, where this is what we call even a performative dining experience, where we talk about taste appreciation in oysters, background stories, all the sort of merroir, which is like the terroir of the sea. Yes. And people experience that over an hour and a half. And then the other side of the business is the tactile, the more adventurous seafood lover who wants to get out on a boat and go to an oyster farm, dump all the oysters out on a big table, cull them, learn how to leisurely farm, and learn how to shuck and have a good time out on the water. So we offer both experiences, just depending on what energy and interest you have.
Do you know I cannot shuck an oyster? I can do a lot of things in the kitchen. I enjoy being in the kitchen. I like cooking. I have worked in many restaurants throughout my career, and I always find myself gravitating towards the kitchen just to, hang out with the kitchen crew and help them do a little prep work. And I've tried to shuck an oyster many times, and I just can't do it. I don't know what it is. I'm not getting the knife in the right groove. I'm afraid I'm going to cut my hand off. What are some tips you can give for this?
It seems really daunting. You're like forcing a knife into a hinge into a very asymmetrical animal. So there's a lot of fear that comes into shucking. But I always remind everyone that shucking is all about finesse, not force. So when you're looking at this animal, you are looking for that hinge, right? That little V shape that's in the back of the oyster. And the cup is always on the bottom as you shuck, which makes things a little wobbly, but right. You just press your hand down very tightly on it. Always wear gloves. This is a very, very common mistake. We have so many people who come to our table with battle wounds, and we tell them, okay, how many tequilas was that? What happened? And that, we hear some really good stories. But a lot of it is just taking it slow for those first times, and learning how to make sure you're not puncturing the meat of that animal. And there's a couple of really great tricks around that. We call it wiggle, wiggle, lollipop, turnkey. That's our methodology, very sophisticated.
Oh, I love that, though. Teach. It's like you're dumbing it down for people like me to figure out how to do it.
And we put it on T-shirts as well, so you can't forget.
I love that. Have you ever had guests who swore they hated oysters before, like, coming on this tour, and then you completely changed their mindset after?
We have had so many guests like that. Most often we find a couple whose one of the partners is obsessed with oysters and one doesn't like them at all, but is just coming along for the ride. And it is our mission to make that person who just came and tagged along an oyster lover too. So we think that a lot of poor shucking in restaurants in the past might have thrown them off because it just ruins texture. We also think that eating oysters too quickly or swallowing them whole, there are a couple of things that, really throw people off. But when we take it slow and we teach them proper tasting etiquette, that's when things really, light bulbs come on for them. And a really fresh oyster that's well prepared, well handled, can be really exciting to somebody new into oysters.
I love that. Let me ask you about the oyster sommelier part. How do you become a certified oyster som? Is there a test or like a tasting exam? What is that like?
Yes, there is now. It's so exciting. So the past 2 to 3 years, the Oyster Master Guild has launched. And this is a program out of New York that's really similar to wine sommelier work.
Okay.
But for oysters. Yeah. This was spearheaded by Julie Chu, who is so well known and a great educator in the oyster industry, as well as Patrick McMurray, who's out of Toronto. He was one of the very fastest shuckers in the world. He was in the Guinness Book of World Records.
How many did he shuck?
I do not remember his numbers, but he is so fast, and there is a global competition, believe it or not, for this in Galway.
Wow,
So
I didn't know that.
people take it very seriously. Yeah.
Will you be entering that anytime soon?
I will not be. We take slow food to another level when it comes to chefing.
That's okay.
But I sincerely appreciate others. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Winning a global award from the World Food Travel Association is huge. What did that recognition change for you, practically and personally?
When we applied for that award, I did not expect us to even be like a blip on their radar. I really didn't, because we were a young business. But we were getting so much incredible feedback and media that it was just, I don't know, very heartwarming for me to even just try. We applied for the Rural Culinary Heritage Experience, which is basically, an experience out in the middle of nowhere that is doing so much to preserve culinary heritage of a specific place. And when we received that, when we found out we were even in the semifinals, I was shocked. I was like shouting from the rooftops about that. And then when we found out we won, it was incredible. I've never felt so proud of something that I created out of nowhere, out of my brain. And it was really validating that we were on the right track and that this is what people want out of food. They want to know the stories. They want to understand it more deeply and know the source.
Yes, they want storytelling and they want experiential things. I think everyone's at a place in their life right now where it's like, we don't need any more stuff, material things. They want experiences. And I think people realize the faster your life goes, that life is short and there's memories to be made in that process. Now, I had a question that I was thinking about while I was preparing for this show, because you're a woman who eats oysters every day. How many oysters do you think you've eaten in your lifetime?
Oh, my gosh. Oh, my goodness.
I mean, it has to be thousands at this point.
It is thousands of oysters. And it's funny because I think I eat less oysters now than I used to eat.
Really?
When I was writing about them. Yes, because we're really busy, right? So we're moving around a lot. We are ordering these oysters now for our guests. I do all of my tasting work at the beginning of the week. And this is a really ceremonial process for me, but I'm not eating and consuming large quantities. So it's more when I have fun. I was out in Seattle, for example, in January for the Oyster Master Guild Summit, and I ate 100 oysters in 2 days. And that was probably my max for a 48-hour period.
Yeah, it's a lot of oysters.
but I am a sincere lover when it's playtime for me.
I know I'm not supposed to ask this, but I did wonder this also. Did you ever have a bad one?
I did. I've had 2 experiences where I've been sick, and it's kind of it's like any sort of bug or norovirus that you go through when you eat a bad oyster, most 99% of the time. But both of those times were my own poor handling where I'd kept those oysters too long, and this was years ago before we started the business, and I just thought I could stretch it in the fridge.
Oh, can't do that with an oyster.
So
no.
I've never been sick outside of my own home, but I learned all of my lessons very early on, and that is, the sniff test on the oyster is extremely important. There are signs that oyster is not fresh.
Tell me what it is.
And you learn it quickly.
Because I don't know what that is. Tell me.
It's just a couple simple things. So when an oyster is served to you, if it looks dry in the half shell, so it's kind of concave, or it's lacked a lot of that brine, or what we call oyster liquor, that's an early sign. And then the next is you should always do the sniff test. These are your aromatics. But if something ever smells fishy or sulfuric, those are your 2 indicators that this is not a healthy oyster. It's not alive. It's dead in the shell. So trust your gut, literally, and your nose when you're eating oysters, and you'll be just fine.
Okay, we're going to leave it right there. Virginia Shaffer is going to take us even deeper into the world of oysters, from spat to shell, farm to wild, and the surprising characters she met chasing the story down the entire American coastline. Stick around. Culinary Confidential will be back after the break.
Over the last 30 years, Newman Ferrara, a New York City law firm, has evolved into a national practice focused on real estate, commercial, litigation, civil rights, class actions, and other complex litigation, representing many of the city's largest property owners, managing agents, and thousands of tenants. Newman Ferrara handles some of the nation's most significant class actions and civil rights matters. Newman Ferrara at 55 East 59th Street, New York City. Go online to newmanferrara.com. That's newmanferrara.com. Listen to the firm's name partner, Lucas Ferrara, every Saturday at 10 a.m. on Dottie Herman's longest-running real estate radio program, Eye on Real Estate, on AM 970. A real estate lawyer for 35 years, Lucas is a professor at New York Law School and is also a published author with books on real estate and New York's landlord-tenant law. Tune in Saturdays at 10 a.m. to hear Lucas's unique perspective and advice on Eye on Real Estate.
Welcome back to Culinary Confidential with Christina Cates on AM 970. The Answer.
And we're back with Culinary Confidential. I'm here with Virginia Shaffer, food writer, certified oyster sommelier, and the woman behind Lady Oyster Tours and Tastings up in Maine. Virginia, before the break, we talked about the origin of your story. Now we need to get to the oyster itself. But as we were going over your timeline about the early days of oysters, it made me remember my very first time trying an oyster. I didn't grow up in a family that ate seafood, so most of my foodie firsts were when I started working in restaurants. So I was 20 years old working at Tavern on the Green, and the Garde station sous chef had made a ceviche, and in it, he had many things, including oysters. I definitely did not enjoy it at the time. There was something about the texture that I didn't appreciate and avoided it in the ceviche. It wasn't until I started going to the seafood raw bar down on Cornelia Street in the Village with my friend Lee, Pearl Oyster Bar, if I remember correctly. I tried them there in their unique state with just a little bit of lemon or just like a smidge of cocktail sauce, and that was a game changer, and now I love them and order them by the dozen.
That's such a good story, and just proof that a really great raw bar can change that experience for you.
Totally. Absolutely. Okay, for listeners who've never thought about it, what actually is spat, and how does an oyster go from that to something on our plate? Because I didn't know that term before I started reading your book.
Yeah, I mean, okay, we're going to get a little birds and the bees
That's
on
okay.
everyone. But
Dumb it down for me, please.
Yeah. So oysters, whether they're born in a hatchery, which is what most oysters we use for aquaculture are born in today, or they're spawned in the wild, what happens is our oysters, especially on the East Coast, are called broadcast spawners. So egg and sperm are released into the water column. They commingle and create this little microscopic organism that has a tiny little foot. And at that point, it's pedaling around for about 2 weeks in the water. It's not a spat yet. But when it lands on another piece of shell, it could be the oyster bed itself, its parents, or it could be in the hatchery, a tiny little piece of granular shell. Once it lands on that and attaches itself, it becomes a spat. And that's when it begins to create and build its own shell. And that starts the life of an oyster in a very sedentary way.
What is, lifetime of an oyster from when it's a spat until it's fully developed?
It depends on the temperature of the water and where that oyster is living and how much nutrition. It's so different. In the Gulf Coast, for example, we can get an oyster to about 3 inches there, which is the common market size to go to, to restaurants, in about a year. But up here in Maine, the waters are so cold that it actually takes about 3 years for an oyster to grow to 3 inches.
Wow.
So an oyster can live a really long time in the wild, 20, 30 years, but by that time it's so big that it's really easy for a predator to get its little hook in the bill and eat the meat. So
those
that's
poor
kind of where
oysters.
Oysters fall. Mm-hmm.
What's the biggest misconception people have about farmed oysters versus wild ones?
I hear this often, and I think the misconception is changing now. But when people hear the word aquaculture, sometimes they get a little spooked by it. They're thinking finfish and fish farming, which, are like consolidated areas, right? Those fish can't migrate. They're also using antibiotics to prevent diseases with fish in such close quarters. They're feeding them food. That's very different in oysters. So oysters, essentially, I get people into the mindset that they're like a ranch, So whether a horse is wild or whether a horse is at a ranch, it's eating the same food. It's sort of like it's got space. It has what it needs. So an oyster is essentially put in the water by an oyster farmer on a lease that they rent, which is surface area of water. And then that oyster consumes anything that the current brings it. All that phytoplankton, algae of that area, the currents, the salinity. So we're not feeding it. We're not, forcing it to have any antibiotics. We're not doing anything outside of what nature intends. We're just protecting them a little bit more as they grow.
I like that. Of everyone you met researching your book, Oyster Society, Adventures of the Shellfishly Motivated, farmers, harvesters, promoters, is there one person or one encounter that still sticks with you to this day?
Oh, my goodness. So many. But the one that I think was most influential or really kind of changed kind of where I was in the journey with the book was down in Panacea.
Where is that?
I don't know. It's in Florida. It's on the Panhandle.
Panacea.
And I will not give too much away, but I met an incredible naturalist there on a whim. I had just lost my grandmother and needed some time away. So I went to this small town where my mom grew up and was eating dinner at a restaurant. And they found out that I wrote about oysters. So they called this 80-something-year-old man to come meet me at 10 p.m. at the bar. And he was incredible. He's an activist. He's been fighting for marshland down in Florida and saving so much acreage for the majority of his life. And I spent a whole weekend with him just learning about his life and history. And it inspired me in so many ways in my writing after that moment, and that what we were writing about was important.
Honestly, I love that. I was just talking to Ryan Pagano off air about like how things just work out, right? Like I wore this jacket today that basically has seashells on it, and I didn't even realize that. And I'm doing the oyster show with you, right? It's like things come in your way in life and you have to just be open to them. And like that's an incredible story you just told. And it actually gave me chills.
Oh, thank you. It was so meaningful. And I think as I went through the book, these moments I have with people, some are quiet, some are loud, but they are all teaching me a lesson and a story that just is so valued. And I think more people will love reading.
I love that. Okay. You traveled the entire coastline for this research. Did you have a wow moment where the flavor differences from region to region really surprised you?
Yes, I did. It was a night with Rowan Jacobson, who is, if anyone knows anything about oysters, he is quite the legend. Has written 2 books and is a big inspiration for me. But he held a night where, for the first time ever, I was able to try all 5 species of oysters that we have in North America. And this, for an oyster lover, is insane because you're looking at these shells. They're all different. You're tasting them. They're all so unique. And it really clicks when you, on a species level, can taste each one by one. And it is so rare for a raw bar to do that because it's difficult to source oysters on every coastline from across the country and get them on one plate. So that was my aha moment, like, oh gosh, taste is really crazy.
Yeah, I'm thinking about it, like, because now I'm like racking my brain of all the raw bars I've been to, and I'm like, I don't think I've ever experienced something like that.
It's so rare. I think I've only seen 1 or 2 raw bars ever try, and it's actually because of our little Olympia oyster that's in the Pacific Northwest. They are tiny, finicky little oysters. They're like the little necks of oysters, and they do not travel well. So you've got to eat them quick if they're anywhere.
Okay. Environmentally, can you talk about their role as a filter, like filter feeders, and why that matters right now?
Yes, it's so important. And I think in Maine, what we sometimes battle with is this growing aquaculture industry, very small family farms, but also some waterfront homeowners who might not like seeing the cages off of their water. So there's always a lot of social licensing that we do when we talk about this. But environmentally, this is where the foundation of why this work is so important. Putting more oysters into the water essentially creates more animals that are filtering that water. Oysters are a keystone species, so that means they are sort of at the foundation of where everything else thrives. Each oyster at about 3 years old is filtering upwards of 50 gallons of water per day. And what that means, they're filtering out nitrogen and carbon from our water. Nitrogen is like excess fertilizers that come through and create algae blooms, all those kinds of things. So they're getting nitrogen out, they're transitioning it into a gas. And then they're getting carbon out of the water and using that to either create their shell or transition a sediment that then is compost for the sea. What they're also doing is providing shelter. So oyster reefs provide a lot of shelter for juvenile animals, and that's where we get larger fish that come in. So cleaning waters, getting carbon and acidity out of our water, providing habitat for other animals that then brings more birds, more seals, more everything else into our waterways is just incredible. And so when we talk about this with people who see these cages and they're kind of like, oh, I don't know, I say, you just wait. It's the perfect fishing hole. You're going to love it.
Oh, that's absolutely true. Actually, in the Hudson River here, I was at the Palm Restaurant downtown, so I had to be, I don't even know, maybe like 15 or so years ago. I remember there was this company that wanted our oyster shells at the end of the night because they were filling the Hudson River with oysters to try to clean up the river, which I thought was crazy, but I mean, maybe it worked. I don't know. But yes, oysters are great filters.
Yeah, and that's probably referring to the Billion Oyster Project. They are a huge project, and those shells are so important for other new oysters that are spawning to land on, and that's essentially how we rebuild reefs.
I love it.
So it's just an incredible amount of work. Mm-hmm.
Coming up, we're talking tasting notes, how to actually taste an oyster like a professional, why raw bars are having such a massive moment right now, and where Virginia Shaffer thinks oyster culture is headed next. Don't go anywhere. You're listening to Culinary Confidential with Christina Cates on AM 970 The Answer.
Over the last 30 years, Newman Ferrara, a New York City law firm, has evolved into a national practice focused on real estate, commercial, litigation, civil rights, class actions, and other complex litigation, representing many of the city's largest property owners, managing agents, and thousands of tenants. Newman Ferrara handles some of the nation's most significant class actions and civil rights matters. Newman Ferrara at 55 East 59th Street, New York City. Go online to newmanferrara.com. That's newmanferrara.com. Listen to the firm's name partner, Lucas Ferrara, every Saturday at 10 a.m. on Dottie Herman's longest-running real estate radio program, Eye on Real Estate on AM 970. A real estate lawyer for 35 years, Lucas is a professor at New York Law School and is also a published author with books on real estate and New York's landlord-tenant law. Tune in Saturdays at 10 a.m. to hear Lucas's unique perspective and advice on Eye on Real Estate.
Welcome back to Culinary Confidential with Christina Cates on AM 970, The Answer.
Welcome back to the show. Virginia Shaffer, Lady Oyster herself, is still with us, and she's the author of Oyster Society, Adventures of the Shellfishly Motivated. We're now getting into the good stuff, how to taste, what's trending, and what's next for the oyster world. Virginia, welcome back to the show.
Thank you, Christina. I'm so looking forward to this part.
Okay, just a quick question, though. Are oysters really an aphrodisiac?
They in some ways can be. I think it's a myth in general, but what that, sort of came from was the high levels of zinc that oysters. And zinc is very, very good for reproductive health.
Ah, okay.
So
Thank you for explaining that.
I know. I think yes. So I could say generally yes, but maybe not so much as we think they are.
Okay. Walk us through it. If I've got an oyster on the half shell in front of me right now, what should I actually be looking for, smelling, and tasting for? I mean, we kind of covered the smell and the look, but what should we be tasting for?
Yeah, there's a whole level of tasting etiquette today that's a lot like the wine industry. So we covered some of those visual cues and aromatic cues already. Once you kind of look at the oyster, I will say there's a couple of quick things. You want a meat that's fully intact, nothing that looks pre-chewed. And I got that from Julie at the Oyster Master Guild. I just kind of love that as a concept, because sometimes they do come out like that in the raw bar.
Yeah.
But something that something that just kind of like virtually looks like the top shell has been taken off and the meat is completely undisturbed is what you're looking for. That glossy sheen we talked about, hydration levels. We talked about aromatics, smell, so trusting that sense. If you have a fresh oyster, it's going to smell like ocean breeze. It's going to have alkaline notes, those really beautiful, fresh, salty notes. And that already engages some of your olfactory system. The next step is to take a sip of the brine. Most people will just shoot that oyster back quickly, but if you take it a little slower and you sip the brine first, that enhances all of those glands that are in your taste buds to really receive the full level of flavor. And then after that is simply eating the oyster. But I do remind people to chew it, because we have a lot of people who come to us who have been indoctrinated by shooter culture and swallow them whole. So definitely take a few chews. Appreciate this crescendo of flavor that you might have that starts salty, maybe creamy, maybe sweet, and finish dry. So there's all sorts of things happening within the anatomy itself.
What is your favorite oyster?
I get asked this all the time, Christina, and I like to say that my favorite oyster is the one I haven't tried. And it's because they're all so nuanced, right? Every oyster will bring something new to the table, and even in different seasons. The seasonality will contribute to flavor as well. I will say I do have my personal favorites up here in Maine, but you might just have to come to a tasting for me to reveal that.
Ooh, I like that. Is that an invitation? Because I'll be there. I'm actually,
yes, it is.
I'm going to try to get up there this fall because I have friends in Portland who own a restaurant called Bistro La Luco, and they're coming on the show shortly to do a show all about like New England fall, luxury travel, and talk about how they basically grew up in the New York restaurant industry and they went up to Portland to open this cool little bistro. So I'm going to be up your way and I will reach out.
You are so invited. You are so invited.
Thank you. Thank you. Why do you think oysters have become such a cultural moment right now? The raw bar boom, the social media appeal, all of it.
I think that there are so many people who have rallied around this industry and just recreated it from the ground up. We saw oysters take a big dive in the 20th century. And that was because water quality around some of our cities wasn't so great. So oysters went out of fashion in the 20s and took about a 50-year break. History really is a huge part of this renaissance. And water quality, and thanks to people like Rachel Carson, who wrote Silent Spring and was able to lobby to get pesticides out of our waterways, all of this happened kind of in the 60s and 70s. And that jump-started this big initiative to get seafood back in American diets. So that's how aquaculture was born, and all of these sort of nuanced elements to our seafood. But what's so cool about oysters and why they're so different is because we can actually tie them to a sense of place, right?
Yeah.
Whereas some other fish, they have migrations, they move. They're different in the way that we experience them. But in this food, we can actually say, aha, this tastes like this. And it must be attributed to that exact place where it was grown. And that just incited so much taste appreciation work and understanding of this animal, and quite frankly, a lot of study as well.
Have you ever tried those French oysters? I think they're called ballons.
Yes, the ballon.
Ballon. Fancy French oysters. I've never had them.
Yes, they are delightful. It's called the European flat or the Austria edulis, and these were the native European oysters. They are pretty rare today. They're difficult to farm, and most of Europe has switched over to our West Coast oyster, which is the Gygus species, if anybody wants to get technical. But here's something really cool. In the 1950s, the ballon, the European flat, was brought over to Maine to see if we could grow it here. There was a lot of just initial farming study happening, and the farming part wasn't successful, but they scattered them in the water and just kind of left them on their own, and they came back in the wild. So we actually in Maine have that species that people can try, and it's referred to as ballons just as a tribute to the Boulogne River in France, but it's the European flat. And it's delightful. There's like some cool chromatics to that oyster. Some people kind of take offense to it because it can be pretty metallic as far as an aftertaste. But for oyster lovers, it's just that crazy difference is so intriguing.
Oh, my goodness. I had no idea we had them up the East Coast. That's amazing. Okay, have you ever done a blind oyster tasting?
I have. I've done it on a species level. I wouldn't say I would compare close river to river oysters, but when you have an East Coast oyster and a West Coast oyster and you have, like a European flat or something else, and you taste those differences, it's so completely recognizable. Some other oysters I've had in a blind tasting are like New England oysters versus Gulf, and you can taste the major differences there, mostly around salinity levels. And, our oysters are so much more briny.
Yes,
but
absolutely.
It's hard to do a blind tasting with oysters sometimes because seasonality and current is so ever changing that we can't always say this oyster will always taste like this, or we can't bottle it like a vintage, if that makes sense.
Oh, no. Okay, that's great because I didn't understand that before this. So thank you for that. Okay, where do you see oyster culture heading next? Are there any regions or varietals people should have on their radar?
Let me think about it. I mean, I think we have really strong industries in both the Pacific Northwest, here in Maine and New England, of course, long legacies and history. But I will say there are some sites turned back towards the South. And I get a lot of people who say, I don't like the Gulf oysters, they don't taste like much. And I love changing their opinion on that because there are a few pockets where we've seen a rise in aquaculture, especially around the panhandle of Florida, Apalachicola area, where these oysters are coming out so salty, so manicured and consistent, and there's a lot of love and labor that has gone into that industry, where I think there's some opportunity there for tourism and some really cool experiences around that new rise.
I think you need to do another Lady Oyster culinary tour there, and we'll just keep Maine as the flagship.
I've got it on my mind.
Ooh, I
really do.
Okay, last question. What's one piece of advice you'd give someone who's intimidated by oysters and wants to build some confidence around them?
One piece of advice I would give is really that we eat oysters very quickly and to take it slow. Texture is a huge part of hesitation with oysters. And I always tell people too, if texture is the issue, why don't we start with the gateway, which is a broiled oyster with some compound butter and some mild cheese. And if you hate that, then you'll never like an oyster. But if you try it with a little bit of accoutrement, or maybe in a grilled fashion, and work your way into the raw, that's always a great segue.
Do you know what really got me hooked on them was the cocktail sauce. If I put the cocktail sauce on it just the right way and the cocktail sauce hits the tongue first and then the oyster on top, it became more palatable for me. And now I'm at a point where I just do a squeeze of lemon and call it a day. But you do have to build up to it if it is a texture thing, which it was for me.
I mean, I am very honest with, I tell people that my first oyster was on a saltine cracker with, cocktail sauce, hot sauce, lemon, salt, and pepper, and another saltine on top, like a sandwich.
Ooh.
So, start your own way, and then, just build up your confidence and enjoy that flavor profile of the oyster. And the more and more you do, the more you'll just appreciate the raw bar.
Awesome. Virginia Shaffer, Lady Oyster, thank you so much for your time tonight. We're going to move into our ingredient of the week now, but I'm going to see you up in Maine at some point for sure.
I'll be waiting for you, Christina. Thank you so much for having me.
Anytime. Okay, and that brings us to our ingredient of the week, which is the finger lime. If you've never seen one, a finger lime looks almost like a tiny knobby cucumber, but crack it open and what spills out looks like something from another planet. Little translucent beads, bursting with citrus in colors ranging from pale green to blush pink to deep coral. Chefs call it citrus caviar, and that's just not a cute name. Those little pearls actually pop in your mouth almost exactly the way real caviar does, releasing a bright, tart citrus juice instead of brine. Finger limes are native to rainforests of Australia, where indigenous Australians harvested them long before they ever showed up on a fine dining menu. For decades, they were considered a bush food curiosity. Then, sometime in the last 15 years, chefs around the world discovered them, and suddenly this obscure little Australian fruit became one of the most sought-after garnishes on the planet. Here's why we're talking about it tonight. Finger lime caviar might be the single most perfect summer companion for an oyster. Spoon a few of those citrus pearls directly onto a freshly shucked oyster, and you get this incredible textural echo, the pop of the citrus mirroring the pop of the oyster itself. Plus, a clean, bright acidity that cuts through the brine without overpowering it. It's like a mignonette that builds itself right into the fruit. A few finger lime pearls, a touch of flaky sea salt, and maybe a whisper of olive oil. That's it. No dicing, no dressing, no fuss. Just crack it open and spoon it on. Keep an eye out for finger limes at specialty grocers and farmer markets throughout the summer. And if you ever spot them, which I never have, honestly, do not walk past. Pick them up and give your next dozen oysters something genuinely unforgettable. Thank you for listening to Culinary Confidential with Christina Cates, Sunday nights at 9 p.m. on AM 970 The Answer. Virginia Shaffer, Lady Oyster herself, thank you, truly. What you've done is take a creature most people never think twice about and turn it into a lens for understanding water quality, coastal economies, and the very history of how we eat. From spat to shell, from the icy winter beds of Maine to the sun-warmed waters of Florida, you've shown us that this humble oyster is one of the hardest working, most quietly heroic animals on this planet. Her book, again, is Oyster Society, Adventures with the Shellfishly Motivated, from Island Port Press. If you've loved this episode, you are going to love that book even more. Virginia, thank you for pulling back the shell on this world for us. That does it for tonight's episode of Culinary Confidential, but before we go, I need a moment because next week is not just another episode. Next week is our 100th episode. 100 episodes, 100 conversations about the food that shapes our tables, our traditions, and our towns. And for a milestone like this one, I didn't want to hand you something light. I wanted to hand you something that matters. Next week, I'm joined by Chef Ivy Stark, a celebrated force in New York's culinary world, known for her decades of leadership in modern Mexican cuisine, and a proud member of City Harvest's Food Council, standing alongside some of the biggest names in food to fight hunger across all 5 boroughs of New York City. Because here's the truth we don't say enough on the show. Food isn't just culture, and it isn't just craft. For millions of people, food is this thing standing between a hard day and an impossible one. City Harvest rescues millions of pounds of food every single year and gets it into the hands of neighbors who need it most. And Chef Stark has spent her career standing at that exact intersection, where extraordinary cooking meets a fierce commitment to making sure no plate in the city goes empty while people go hungry. 100 episodes ago, this show started as a conversation about food. Next week, it becomes a conversation about what food means and what we owe each other because of it. Join me for episode 100 with Chef Ivy Stark. You will not want to miss this one. That's the show for tonight. Thanks for listening and have a great night.
The preceding program is sponsored by Shake It Off Live, LLC.